go and talk about archetypes, talk about the most troublesome archetypes in the past couple of years, the social media fame. Archetypes are very important because they influence our thoughts, our behavior, our feelings. They influence who we are and what we do, and it can cause a lot of difficulties for us. So let's look at the social media fame archetype I have here on the screen. Overall, any archetype of fame represents quality of charisma, influence, and captivating online presence. It's also a symbol of widespread recognition, popularity in the digital realm, and it thrives on engagement with a constant desire for increasing followers and likes. We are. So this is what are the characteristics of the social media fame archetypes. And why are we talking about it, about this particular archetype? Well, because archetypes is being a popular demand for presentation, and social media fame archetype is something that a lot of people are overwhelmed by it. So let's understand the overwhelming aspect of the social media fame. The shadow aspects, remember that we have the archetype and then with two legs as the shadow. So the shadow aspects of the social media fame are the validation seeker and the clickbait manipulator. So let's take a look at this validation seeker and clickbait manipulator and see what can we learn from this so we can apply in real life to for many benefits. Yeah. Now, the validation seeker characterizes an individual who heavily relies on external validation, hence validation seeker, especially in the form of likes, comments, and followers. And what this does to the individual connect back again. So we are back, I believe so. All right. All right, things look pretty good. Go back to this design. And all right, we're doing good. So the characteristics of the validation seeker are that they constantly seek the external validation in the form of likes, comments, followers, because this will affirm their self-worth in the digital space. So what does this mean? I mean, into the mind of the validation seeker, it means that if they have an online presence and if they don't get followers or likes or comments, then their self-worth, their identity and their self-worth is not good enough. Well, this is sad, and a lot of people are afflicted with this type of overwhelm. So we want to understand this and make sure that we are not going to be afflicted by this condition. This is a serious condition that turns into a lot of emotional lack of health. The validation seeker also is a symbol of a person who seeks constant approval and recognition, and they measure their success and their value through the metrics of social media engagement. Are you kidding me? Well, people are overwhelmed with this. To believe that your success and your value is reflected upon the metrics from social media, please don't do that. Be mindful of what the metrics are, but to measure your success and your value through that, let's try not to do that. Now, do other people measure other online identities and online presence as being successful due to their large number of followers? Probably do. Um, should you be affected by it? No, I hope not. I hope not. The other characteristics of validation seeker is they thrive on the instantaneous feedback from the online audience, often allowing the online audience to dictate their sense of self. Mhm. Instantaneous feedback, which gives permission to the audience to dictate a sense of self. That is not good. It's not good, and we do not want to do that, because that's not the self. We talked about the archetype of the self in a prior session, and this is the shadow aspect of being famous. So now we're talking about the social media type of a fame archetype, but any other fame archetype will have its shadow in a validation seeker and in a clickbait manipulator. Randy, you want to add something on this?
It might be useful if you want to, I'm backing up a little bit, but maybe discuss what an archetype is from a Jungian view and just generally speaking.
So let me get to a slide of what the archetype is. Some of the common archetypes, archetypes um, are also referred to a permanent imprint, permanent deposit. According to Carl Jung, archetypes are patterns that have been formed by permanent deposits, and they have been constantly repeated for many generations, memories and patterns of human experiences. And these archetypes, they stimulate or trigger these imprints in all of us, and they are very powerful because they influence our thoughts, feelings, and emotions. And in order to have an archetype, you will have a form, a geometric form. We could begin to understand that the first basic geometric form of an archetype would be a triangle, right? Universal archetypes as experiences are birth, belonging, love, death, and fear, right? So we talked about the self as a wholeness of the self, according to Carl Jung, which is, he presents such a complete formula, being made of the persona, the shadow, anima, animus, and individuation. So throughout life, we seek this return to wholeness. Some people call it return to the heart. Some people call it individuation. There's many different terminologies to this. So today I am talking about the social media fame archetype. Why? Because so many people are afflicted with being overwhelmed by the shadow of what this archetype, social media fame archetypes brings over. And the shadow of it being the validation seeker and the clickbait manipulator. And this emotional thoughts, behaviors, beliefs, and values of being a validation seeker or a clickbait manipulator, they carry a heavy load on an individual. And if we bring this to light, as any shadow, if we bring light into the shadow, then the shadow begins to dissipate slower and slower. But the number one thing that I want to encourage everybody that needs to establish an, well, is there anybody that doesn't need to establish an online presence nowadays? Most people, if we provide a service, it pretty much having an online presence, it's an extension of your identity. And if it's actually getting even more complex to the extent that you log into your accounts, and then you are asked to validate your login through your cell phone, validate your identity. So digitalness and the digital world, it's part of our life. It has become part of our identity, whether we like it or not. But there's so many entrepreneurs and solopreneurs and small businesses that need to establish an online presence and an online identity. And everybody does that, and they do pretty good at it. But sooner or later, they will become overwhelmed by the need to become famous, because the archetype, the behavior that has been attached to online identity now is to have an increased number of followers and a lot of likes and a lot of comments, because social media provides you with metrics. And then everybody else sees your metrics. And then if you have a large number of metrics, that means you're successful. Well, no, it's successful according to the metrics and to whatever the software calculates and takes in consideration, but it's not your personal self-worth and individual value. It's not. Now, it could, we now, okay, I'm not going to go that route, because now I'm going to stick with this route. Now, the traits and characteristics of validation seekers is that they depend on the metrics. I just touched up on it a little bit earlier, and they are obsessed by monitoring their likes, the comments, the follower counts, deriving a sense of achievement and validation from these quantifiable metrics. Now, they are metrics indeed, but to begin to measure your success and your self-worth from these metrics, it's going to take you down sooner, faster than tomorrow. Another characteristic of validation seeker is that they, by achieving a high number of likes or gaining new followers, provide them with satisfaction, but then eventually it's going to dissipate, leading them to a continuous cycle of seeking more validation. And we do have plenty of behavioral examples and behavioral characteristics of people seeking a validation, not just in social media, but overall in life. Um, and these people that seek validation, they do not have a whole sense of self. And to this aspect, this is just one type of a persona of what makes their all of the personas that they need to present themselves to interact with the world. Yeah, because we don't have just one persona. And I'm not talking about multiple personalities because that's not it. We have multiple personas and multiple roles in life, a mother and a father and a worker and a colleague and a neighbor and a caregiver and so on. Now, another trait and characteristic of this validation seeker is their authenticity is being sacrificed, because when they are in the pursuit of approval, they need approval to have a better sense of self and self-worth and quality of success. They compromise their authenticity because they begin to do things that are not necessarily authentic to them, um, by crafting a persona that aligns with the popular trends rather than expressing genuine thoughts and feelings. Mhm. It's a tricky situation. It's a tricky situation, with the online presence and seeking fame. And well, you want to increase your presence because you have a good product or service that you offer. It might be unique, might be brand new, and it's going to help a lot of people. So you want to increase your presence, you want to present, you want to offer this to the world. But to measure your self-worth based on the validation, that it's going to deteriorate your self-esteem and of course your self-worth quickly. Um, Also, validation seeker is going to be highly vulnerable to criticism. Um, they're also going to have a comparative mindset. They're going to check their competition or their neighbors to see, do they have better metrics, and this is going to affect their offline impact to a high degree, because they're going to begin to neglect the real life relationship and activities as the validation seeker prioritizes the digital realm over genuine human connections. So, Randy, what do you want to add on this? Because a validation seeker, it's not archetypal as a persona just in social media. We have all kinds of validation seekers in real life, and clients that we see. Um, um, to some degree, they need a validation, some sort of. I mean, there's healthy need for validation. Um, then at work, for example, having a boss, you kind of seek their validation for the job that you've done, right? And you've been in supervisory role, Randy, and you can kind of, you've had plenty of experiences on how you went about validating a good or not good enough contribution.
Yeah, it's a it's it's a very long tightrope, and it's a real balancing act in terms of
Mhm.
what is helping and what isn't. Because yeah, to say we shouldn't seek validation, things just aren't black and white mostly. And so when when we, it's there. It's more complicated at times in terms of what is healthy validation and what isn't. There's a lot of unhealthy validation. It seems to me unhealthy on the internet because they're, especially with women. I don't know. I haven't. Uh, I don't look at it that much to know what men, what the men do. But if I'm looking at like an Instagram post, um, there was one I just remember this because it was just so weird. It was a model, and of course models live on validation. And this is a female model, and she was turning 60, I think, and she was posting something on Instagram. I don't know how I came across it, but she was posting something, and somebody had said something about her looks, and she was wanting. Well, the bottom line is, I'm sorry. The bottom line is that out of every 400 or 500 comments, it would say, "Oh, you're gorgeous, you're beautiful, you're ageless, um, you're astonishing." There'd be one person, and it's usually a male, that'll say, uh, "Cover yourself up. You're an old hag. Your skin looks horrible," and that's the comment they would focus on. I remember because I was reading an article about. I came across. I was reading an article. She was going to post herself in a bathing suit or lingerie or something to show all the haters that she's not intimidated. Well, you're not going to show haters. Nobody's going to show haters anybody that anything. The people that hate like that, which are usually men, they're going to keep on doing that no matter what. So looking for validation online is looking for love in all the wrong places, really.
Yes, and you bring out a very good point. I happen to have a good friend of mine that was in a similar situation, not affecting her looks, but affecting her accent. Um, and she was complimented of having a very heavy accent, which an accent that it's similar to a neighboring country, and which she took as an insult. And after this compliment, which I take it as a compliment, but she took it as an insult. After that, she she stopped creating content for the social media, which is very important to her and still is very important to her. So just as you say, one comment out of so many good feedback, we get one bad feedback, it's just gonna destroy your confidence. So confidence is so important to every single one of us. And most of the clients that we see, eventually we end up to the confidence. We work with whatever we need to work to address underlying issues to arrive at their confidence, to arrive at the self, to individuate the self, to arrive to wholeness. But you're not going to arrive at the wholeness without the confidence. So confidence is very important. So keeping in mind that in the online world, the digital realm, as we need to establish an online identity, which is just so, I don't think we can get away from it anymore. Um, well, if you run a cash business, that you don't need an online identity. Um, um, having to seek validation and to measure your self-worth and your success and the sense of self through that being validated by the numbers, by the metrics. Try not to do that. Take the metrics as information and do what needs to be done. uh, but don't allow your self-worth to be deteriorated because the metrics um, are different than what you would like it to be or are different than somebody else's. Because nowadays it's so easy to get metrics with the sufficient amount of dollars. You can get all kinds of metrics. Go ahead and feed the social media providers with your dollars, and you will get metrics. If that is important to you, then that's what you're gonna get. It's easy to get metrics on social media nowadays. It takes effort, but doesn't take as much effort as one would think. Just just a few dollars, maybe a few thousand, maybe a few 100,000, right? But those dollars will bring you metrics. You want to add something, Randy?
Well, they're down here in Louisiana, in Baton Rouge, is a good example of the problem with all of this, in my opinion. And I don't mean it to be a problem, but there is a gymnast here at LSU who's in the state university. I can't remember her name. It's blocking. But anyway, I think she's a junior or senior this year. I think she's a junior. And she's very accomplished gymnast, but she is one of the highest earners on Instagram. And she's the hot, they changed the rules for college athletics about 2 years ago, years or two ago. And now college athletes can make lots and lots and lots of money and keep it. Before they couldn't make any money. And all the money went to the university or went to sports foundations and things like that. But now students can make that money. And there's 2 or 3 of them here at LSU that are making not a few 100,000, not $500,000, tens of millions of dollars.
Wow.
Millions and millions. And she is worth, I think the last I saw when I was reading about it, because it's kind of newsy down here, she's worth like $25 million. Now, what has she done to make that much money? She gets online and she poses very seductively and with little clothes. She's about 20 or 21, so it's all legal. But she has amassed a small fortune just by doing that. That's all she does. It's not about her athletic prowess or athletic ability, even though she is very talented. Apparently, she's a gymnast, or her academic abilities. It's how she looks, and how she looks without clothes, mainly.
Yeah.
And I don't know what that means. I'm not smart enough to figure out what that means, but I know as a person, if I were a female, and I try to be empathetic, if I was a 20-year-old, 21-year-old female at LSU, struggling to get money to pay my rent and buy my books, I would wonder about the state of our world. I shouldn't say that, but I would. I don't know. I don't know what to make of it. She gets a lot. She and others. She's not the only one, of course, but she just comes to mind because she's the richest athlete in the country, and it's only because of online validation. But when does that end? And what is it validating? And what are we? I don't know. I'm just throwing it out there without any kind of explanation because I'm not smart enough to figure it out. But it certainly is an example of how validation has gone crazy on the internet.
Yes. Yes.
I'm glad she's making a lot of money, but um, it's not because she's the greatest athlete that LSU's ever produced. It's because of how she looks, plain and simple.
Yes, and to the same effect. Was it in last year? There were some studies done that the rate of depression among teenagers has skyrocketed because of social media. And I forget what Instagram, they instituted some sort of rules, but there were teenagers that believed they were not beautiful enough, that affected their self-esteem, their self-worth, and during the pandemic. And during the pandemic is how you keep in touch with your friends through the social media, and then everybody post their best looking selves over on social medias, and teenagers were there was an increase in the rate of depression among teenage girl. And then a new social media platform opened that does not show any metric, doesn't show how many followers, doesn't show how many likes, doesn't show how many comments, none of that. So that would make it easier on a validation seeker to not have their self-worth so heavily impacted, because the impact of the validation seeker is, because they need external validation, it prevents them from deep self-reflection, which hinders personal growth and self-discovery. So online identity is important, but that's not all you are. That's not all we are. It's certainly not all that I am. My online identity is just a piece of me. It's just a part of me, the way I present myself in a particular setting. Yeah. Now, the other impact is that it contributes to a volatile self-esteem, and where the self-esteem becomes contingent on external factor, and it makes it susceptible to fluctuation based on social media feedback. This feedback can really destroy your self-esteem in less than a second. Yeah. So let's keep this in mind and not be as affected by it from going forward. And then there is the risk of burnout. If you constantly look for validation, it's going to lead to a burnout, because investing significant time and energy into maintaining that ideal online image. Yeah. So, and your emotional resilience is automatically limited, and that is a big no-no. We don't want to have our emotional resilience limited. We want to actually quite the opposite, to increase our emotional resilience. That's why we do all kinds of personal development and coaching and hypnosis and therapy and all that, and goes to school and learn so many things to increase our emotional resilience. Because with a limited emotional resilience, you have difficulty coping with criticism, or what you perceive to be criticism, which might not necessarily be criticism, and it affects your mental and emotional well-being. It does. And the way to address it, you want to add something, Randy?
Yeah, I think you may be getting ready to say this, uh, um, or as we say in the South, you may be fixing to say this. Uh, the thing to take away from this, because I anticipate a lot of people who would be listening will say, "Well, I don't do that. I don't go online. I don't show off online. I don't put pictures. And, this has nothing to do with me whatsoever." And in that sense, it doesn't. However, it's a good lesson to learn. I think what the good takeaway from this is how do you get validation as a person? How do we validate ourselves? And where do we get our validation from? It doesn't have to be online. Do we get validation from work? Do we get validation from our family? Where external and internal do we get? And that's what a lot of hypnosis does that helps is like what is important to us. And this doesn't have to be heavy duty hypnotherapy. You can go online and get uh, there's only about 500,000 online examples of self hypnosis to determine what your values are, what's important to you. Am I living my values? What is important? And how do I validate that? How do I get validation from it? How do I validate myself? A lot of times that gets lost in the shuffle of daily life. And that's why we end up feeling empty, burnt out, depressed. It doesn't have to come from clicks online. It can be in real life. We get validation from something. We should. It's good to get it.
Yes, yeah. You definitely bring a good point. Because seeking validation, it doesn't happen just online. It's just it's a good topic of discussion for today's overwhelm of digital world overwhelm. So what do we do? What do we do about this validation seeker online? How can we transform and heal the need to have validation? Not the appreciation for validation, but the need to be validated. I mean, of course, you're going to appreciate your followers and your comments, likes, and, everybody would appreciate that. Nobody's going to say, oh, I have too many, let's cut some down. No, that's not going to be, because it's competition. It's such a innate human a trait, and we want to do good. So we can appreciate it, but we don't have to be defined by it. So there are four ideas over here. Of course, more are available, but for right now, we can begin to cultivate intrinsic value. Then we can use social media mindfully. We can engage in authentic expression, and then balance the online and offline life. Yeah. So cultivating intrinsic value has you focus on the qualities and personal accomplishment outside of the social media realm. Certainly, you have some qualities and many personal accomplishments that you've from outside of the social media. And if you cultivate intrinsic value off of that, then your internal self-worth changes and shifts and increases. So appreciating all of the metrics as opposed to seeking, being hungry for the metrics. Yeah. And then number two, it's mindful social media use. That means to adopt a mindful approach to the time you spend on the social media, emphasizing quality connection over the quantity. Yeah. Because this is going to foster a healthier relationship with the online platforms. Yeah. So having an online presence requires you to spend a certain number of hours per day online, but with the use of so many apps that helps automate a lot of tasks for the online use, you can definitely cut down on some of the day, on some of the hours. I mean, me and Randy are not online every single night, I mean, we could. I mean, we have lots to talk about and lots to offer, but no, we have life outside of online as well, right? And then you want to look into authentic expression, to embrace authenticity in your online interaction and to foster genuine connections. Because then you're going to attract followers who appreciate the individual that you are. And there's a lot of lack of authenticity online because due to the archetype, many have been coached to behave in a certain manner, to read scripts, follow a certain a formula, so that this way they get increased metrics. But this is overwhelming, yeah. But if you go into your authentic expression, then things begin to shift. Me and Randy have fun with this podcast. We have no expectations of it. We enjoy doing this podcast for the purpose of educating, um, and we get requests. I've get a lot of feedback. Somehow the feedback that I get is on private messaging. Uh, Well, because we're in a business of hypnotherapy, so when some people hear the word therapy, they run away from it. But hypnotherapy is not psychotherapy, and we are making that very clear that hypnosis, it's first about personal development and personal change, and then number 4, into healing the validation, this validating a validation seeker archetype, is to balance your online with your offline life and replace a real world experiences and relationship, because we still have them. Although the pandemic has impacted individual and face-to-face relationship, and a lot of people have moved. Well, I know a lot of Romanians that have moved, and not Romanians too. And people are, because working from home now, people are getting jobs, and it doesn't matter which. Some people move. Well, I just happen to know some friends of mine that are moving to a different state because they got a good job in the state. So, yeah. So spend some time outside of the online with people that matter to you, or people you want to meet, or just do grocery shopping more often. To just get away from the online every now and then. You don't have to be present online how many hours a day. You don't have to. Randy?
Yeah, and I think another factor is, well, there's a couple of things I had in mind, but one is internal. How do we validate ourselves? What do we get validation from? What do we want to get validation from? And how do we get it? A lot of people do it naturally. The other question is, how do we give validation? And I learned, I have a daughter, and I learned this real early on. Something, I guess I got woke. I don't know. I learned very early on that for instance, this is an example. What a male says to a young girl, what they validate, can be very impactful. And what I mean is that for whatever reason, and I don't know why, but I see men see little girls. Oh, you're so cute. You're so pretty. You're so. It's such a feminine looking little dress, and you're so pretty, and you're so. Your hair is so pretty, 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 pretty. Uh, and I learned the hard way. I did some, I don't know. My daughter didn't rebel, but I just became very aware that that kind of how I was giving validation was probably not very healthy because little girls, they can't help how they look. And there's other things to validate besides that. And to this day, I try, I sometimes fail, but try as best as I can never to mention a person's looks, female or male these days, but especially a female, because by and large, they can't help it. Some people can. Some people are, they could change how they appear. They can wear better clothes or whatever. But it's just I just learned that there's a way to give validation other than how people look, and that was just one lesson I learned. And it's particular. It just was particularly true with men with women because it ends up teaching a little girl that where to get validation from is from the male, what's called the male gaze, how a man looks at it. And um, I was reading. The last thing I'll say is I saw a very very interesting story. It was a very tragic story, but it's turned out it's going to be okay ultimately. But it was a story about a woman who had um, lost. She had gotten. I don't remember how she got. Anyway, she ended up having sepsis, and I can't remember how she got it, but she ended up in the hospital. They almost missed the sepsis. She lost her leg, her lower leg, and her lower arms. And if that person had to validate how she looked, what would that do? Um, if you don't mind, Carmen, I'll give you a story that has stayed with me for 40, 50, how old am I? 60, 40
Yes.
now? 60 years or so. Well, 50. It's a very short story, but uh, this illustrates what you're saying, the point you're making, and really is a very good lesson. It's a story about this man I knew when I was a teenager named Mr. Evans. My father was a minister, and Mr. Evans was part of his church. And my father, when he first introduced me, I'll never forget this. He first told me and my brother about Mr. Evans. He said he's got 3 daughters or 4 daughters, I think it was 3 or 4. And he said, now he has a scar on his face, and it is very, very noticeable. So try not to stare at it and don't look. And so when we met Mr. Evans, sure enough, he had a scar that ran. Something had happened. There'd been some accident he was in that took away his whole cheek. He didn't have a cheek on his right side of his face. It was gone. And in place of it, now this is back in the 60s. In the place of it was this gigantic scar. So he was difficult to look at in that sense. Uh, and what happened was, as I got to know him, I actually worked with him one summer. He worked at where my father worked. My father was a part-time preacher. He did full-time work at an electric company in Shreveport. And Mr. Evans worked with my father at that electric company. And one summer they hired me, and I worked with Mr. Evans. And he was the sweetest, kindest, friendliest, most easygoing person I've ever known. I mean, he validated me as a teenager. And you know what? What was weird? The moral of the story to me, eventually, I never saw the scar. It disappeared.
Yes.
I went into a trance every time I saw it. And I never saw, I was in what's called a negative hallucination. Something was there that I didn't see. His scar
Yes.
was there, but I did
Hmm.
not see it. That's a negative hallucination in hypnosis work.
Yeah.
And all I cared about was just how nice a guy he was, friendly person he was, and how friendly he was to me as a little lost teenager trying to do a job, and how accepting he was. So, what do we validate, and what's validation, and what's important? It gets a lot. It's Mr. Evans taught me it's more than skin deep. That's what I learned. That's my little story.
That's a very good story. That's a very good story. And you are correct. Beauty is in the eye of the beholder. And if how we are treated we remember how someone treats us, not how they look. So you can look as good as you want, but if you don't treat someone well, this is how they're going to remember you. You didn't treat them well. So you're right. He was a sweet person, and it wasn't his fault he had the accident. It's not like he actually purposely mutilated himself. Um, and what you appreciated was how he treated you. So that stays with you, and even to this day, so you appreciate how when others treat you well. Well, I do too,
And he
and
was he, yeah, he was validated by his actions, not his
yes,
looks, and ultimately, that's what counted. And yeah, yeah, I've been around. When we get to be my age, been around a lot of people who are very attractive people, and are very validated for it, who are just impossible, difficult. I don't want to be around them. They're
yes,
I knew somebody that was a very attractive person, very needy in terms of validation, very much into her looks, spent hundreds and hundreds of dollars a month on clothes, makeup. But she was impossible to be around. It was very difficult. So, not to dump on her, but what I'm saying is that uh, the internet encourages us to validate us on superficial things like looks. And that is the least important thing, ultimately. I'd say. That's it.
yes. You are correct. You are correct, and this has been a good session today. Now we know where to begin to not be affected by seeking validation and by measuring our self worth and the quality of our success by social media metrics. And next time, maybe we'll talk about the clickbait manipulator on social media, because I already touched up on the fact that increasing metrics on social media is rather easy with the correct amount of money. So that's actually easy to increase metrics. Um, you either pay the platform to increase it for you, or you pay someone to spend their full-time job on the platform to increase your metrics, and that is doable. So that's not how I measure, but that's how other people measure. And if you want to increase your self-worth, your self-esteem, and get away from being taken down by seeking validation from social media just because it's an archetype, just because everybody else is doing it. If you want to increase your confidence, give us a call, whether me or Randy or anybody else that feels right to you. Do something about it, but don't don't be overwhelmed by these archetypes. There's so many different archetypes that are just being born out of this digital realm. Right? And do you want to add something else?
No, I think we got it covered. I think I think you've made a lot of really good points, and it's a really good topic to bring up. The Like you said, the amount of depression among adolescents is at a epidemic, pandemic level, and
Yeah. Yeah.
Plus us, adults too. Us will all struggle with this.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a good point.
All right. All right. So, very well. Thank you very much. Have a good rest of the day and continue to send me your questions. I appreciate your private comments. No, I will not disclose your names. I respect privacy fully. And thank you. And we'll see you next time.